Welcome back to another podcast episode of Discipleship with Bori. Um, Today, I want to talk about Jeremiah chapter 16. Um, on my YouTube, I've been kind of going through the book of Jeremiah and kind of going chapter by chapter and extracting some something that really stood out to me within that chapter instead of just like dissecting the whole chapter itself. So today I was reading Jeremiah chapter 16, and the first like couple verses just immediately stood out to me, where God gives a specific command and instruction to Jeremiah to not have to not take up a wife and to not have any children. And like it sounds. I feel like today that doesn't sound like too much of a crazy request. I think we find more and more people in society, and I actually think that it's sort of a bad thing now that I'm thinking about it. But maybe not a bad thing, but like a scary sign. Um, but I think we could find more and more people in today's society who just outright say like, I'm not gonna get married. I don't want to have children. I think we see that more in today's society than I guess is normal, and I think why I think it's a scary sign is because, like, if you look in the Old Testament, like it was such a strong tradition to have children and to be married. It was like people looked down on you when you didn't, you know, have children and get married. Um, it was because of like your part of your purpose or responsibility is to like procreate, and so today's society, obviously there are a number of things that deviate from biblical teaching, but one of the I don't think that as Christians, as believers, as disciples of Christ, as followers of Christ, that we should look at these things and kind of just be desensitized. Wow. That we should look at these things and be desensitized to them. I think that we should see them and be like concerned, like, yeah, this is a trend in the wrong direction. That society and people in society have decided that, you know, the new norm and the new idea is to not have children and not get married, and it becomes such a popular thing to do because it's like there's so many benefits for marriage and there's so many benefits for having children, and there's a lot of discipline that goes into it, and you become a lot more like Christ when you take those when you take that step of faith to get married to someone and to have children. And yes, I understand the societal reasons for, maybe you just haven't found the right person, or maybe you don't think that the right person is out there for you. Maybe you just don't trust people enough. Maybe you just hate the way that, you know, the opposite sex thinks. Like, you see a lot of the narrative on social media about why people think this way, but I don't think that even that is healthy. Like, those narratives are unhealthy, and a lot of it come from negative experiences where people just project it onto people that are completely removed from the negative experience that you had. But yet we people hold on to like bitterness and unforgiveness, and it creates walls in our hearts, and it creates hardness in our like belief that we can, or that person can get married and have children with someone that they trust and someone that they can build a loving and a healthy relationship with. And I think that people just get so they they get so like caught up in the amount of toxicity that they see. But if you really think about marriage, you're only supposed to be with one person. So you're looking at the majority of the percentage of toxicity. But in reality, it may be it's a 1% person that you're trying to find. The person that you're supposed to get married with is 1% of the entire population of the whole world. If it's not even 1%, like it's a tiny, tiny, minuscule percent, right? And so like though that there is a toxic like culture of both sexes, there is still supposed to be there, or there still exists someone out there that doesn't that none of that toxicity applies to, because it's just one person. And yes, this narrative exists, and yes, like dating culture is bad, and yes, a lot of people have terrible perceptions about different things, but one person is all that we're looking for, and they're not going to be found within the majority. But anyways, I think that people, where when they build these narratives, they just need to take it with a little bit of salt. The narrative of like, I'm not going to get married again, I'm not going to have children, or I'm not going to get married, I'm not going to have children. Take it with a grain of salt. Like, yes, that could be a disposition, but understand that there's a lot of benefits to getting married, and there's a lot of benefits to having children, and it's part of being and growing closer to God. It's not to say that you can't go closer to God without these things. It's just that um, just take it with a grain of salt. That's not even the whole idea of the podcast today, but that stood out to me because it was a strange thing for God to instruct Jeremiah to do in chapter 16, because it was so against the cultural norms of that day. But God gave him that instruction for a specific reason, because the nation of Israel and the nation of Jerusalem, the nation of Judah, were being taken into exile. Their future was going to be dark. Their future was going to be grim. Their future was uncertain. Well, it was uncertain to them, but certain to God and his plan. And he knew that they were going to be suffering for a certain amount of time. And so he instructed Jeremiah to, don't try to build this life because I'm giving you a specific instruction, because I know what I'm going to do. And these people are going to die gruesome deaths. These children are going to die gruesome deaths. The mothers are going to die gruesome deaths. And it's not going to be the picture of family that I intended for. So don't do this thing that is inherently good, because God created marriage, God created family, God brought this union together where the two shall become one flesh, and He gives the blessings to families, and He gives the blessings to people who are obedient in Him and getting married and having children and being committed to a marriage. He gives those blessings to those people. So of course this is something that He intended, right? He intended marriage, and He brought this together. That was His idea. Divorce and separation is the enemy's idea and the enemy's work. But he tells Jeremiah not to, because he knows that there's going to be destruction for the families of Israel and Jerusalem at this time, because of the disobedience of this nation for such a long time and their unwillingness to repent. And it was, I mean, even that specific instruction that God gives Jeremiah to do, that is so against the grain of culture at that time. And that we can learn from that specific lesson right there. We can apply that into our lives in 2025, where there's not necessarily a cultural norm anymore to get married and have children. There's not a cultural expectation. People don't really look down upon people today when they decide to say that they're not going to get married and not going to have children, because, like I said, it's a norm. People, I mean, so many things are normal now, but for him back in the day, that was a crazy instruction. And I think that God for us today will give us a task to do that is against cultural norm. And I think that even being a believer of Christ and a follower of Christ and a disciple of Christ, that in and of itself is against the cultural norm. To believe in Jesus, to have a relationship with Him, and to live that out, the act of living it out, that is really where you're gonna rub society the wrong way, because you're gonna have to say, I don't agree with that thing because the Bible says this. And so you're going to stand out, even just as being a disciple. But even further than that, there are things that God is going to ask you to do in your life that you can't really point to it in the Bible and be like, that's a sin. And let's use the example of Jeremiah. It wasn't that having a wife and having children was is a sinful thing. God gave him a specific instruction for a specific reason. So God may give you a specific instruction for a specific reason, though that thing may not necessarily be a sin. He's giving you a specific instruction because he has a specific purpose in place for you. To not listen to that specific instruction, that thing will then become a sin, because now you're being disobedient to God and you're not trusting him, because he has given you a specific instruction. And though that sounds like the instruction sounds strange, and though it's like, but God, you telling me to stop doing this thing or not to do this thing, but it's not a sin. And he's like, so what? I gave you this instruction for a reason, so go ahead and do it. And we never, Pastor Philip Anthony Mitchell said, you never know what's on the other side of a simple act of obedience. And I had a friend who was telling me about something he felt God was telling him to do. And it just seems so small and insignificant, the act of what he felt God was telling him to do. And um, he finally did it, and he was like, it didn't even feel that special. And it was like, yeah, but you honestly don't know what the implication and what the ramifications of that simple instruction is. Like, you don't know who you set free by just doing that small little thing. And even if you did that small little thing, you expected this whole grandeur, heaven, sky opening, angels coming down and blowing trumpets and giving you wings. No, sometimes everything's just gonna continue as normal, but you never know on the spiritual end of things what that did, what the domino effect of it is. And you don't need to know it. That's the whole point of trusting in God, is you don't need to know what is on the other side of it. You just need to know, this is what God told me to do, so I need to do it. I need to do it in full obedience to him. And um like for Jeremiah, and though he was given the simple instruction, he was obedient to it. He didn't have children, he didn't have a wife. I mean, he saved himself from a lot of pain too, because I mean, there was an impending doom for the families of Jerusalem at that time. That there was a promise of gruesome deaths for those people at that time. So God's instruction also saved Jeremiah from a lot of pain, and God's instructions to us will save us from a lot of pain. So they do a couple things right? Like our obedience, we never know why God is calling us to be obedient to something, right? It's to prevent something from happening to us. It's to prepare us for the thing that he's called us to do. Because Jeremiah needed to continue to prophesy to the nation of Israel, and this is the instruction that God gave to him in Jeremiah chapter 16. So he's like, yeah, I'm preventing you from pain, but I'm also preparing you, because there's 52 chapters in Jeremiah and we only on chapter 16. So you have to continue doing this, and in order for you to keep doing it, you got to be obedient to me right now with this instruction that I'm giving you. So it's to prepare. I didn't really write down these bullet points, but I'm seeing it as I go. And I'm sure that was a difficult thing for Jeremiah to be obedient to, because, like, maybe he expected that when he was a boy or something, before God called him, then maybe he was going to be able to have a wife and children like everyone else around him. Maybe in your life, you have certain expectations about how your life is going to go, and God is like, no. Then what? Then how do you perceive Christ? How do you trust him when he tells you no to something, or when he gives you a different vision for your life than you had intended? That is hard. That is hard as a believer, as a human, to grasp. When God tells you no to something, that's not wrong, but he wants you to trust him anyway. And it's like, Why? Those moments in our faith journey are some of the most difficult ones, because it's like we have our plan, we have our vision, and maybe we're executing it, and on along our way to executing our plan and our vision, God stops us, interrupts us, and says, no, like, I don't want you to pursue this any further. I don't want you to do that. It's not sin, but it will be, because now you're being disobedient. Like, you have to yield to God wherever He tells you to go or not to go anymore. And it goes back to Luke chapter 9, verse 23, where Jesus says, take up your cross and deny yourselves. Specifically, he said to all, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. So I just did a little bit of research on that passage of scripture. And back in Jesus's day, when someone took up their cross, it meant that they were being led to their death. Like, no one just took up a cross; it was a symbol of death. So if you were taking up a cross, you knew that you wasn't coming back. You knew that it was immediately death that you were heading to. No one had a testimony of, yeah, I took up my cross and I came back. So, and Jesus is telling us to do that daily. So it's like, obviously it's not a physical taking up your cross, it's a spiritual taking up your cross, where the things that we want to do, we have to surrender those things to Christ, whether those things be good, or even when those things are bad, like when a unforeseen circumstance comes into our life and we know how we want to handle it, we have to surrender the way that we want to handle it for God's will, because maybe He has a different plan for this unforeseen circumstance in our life, for this unforeseen battle in our life. He has a different plan for it, so He has a different way of going about executing it through His instruction to us. And whatever that instruction is may be very difficult for us to grasp, such to the point where He might tell us to do something that we don't want to do. And that is tough. Those moments are tough in our faith journey, and I don't think it's something that happens instantaneously. I think it's something that we always find ourselves wrestling with and struggling with. And I think God is very gracious to us in that moment, because it's not like, like we say we're believers, and yes, and then when God asks us to do something difficult, it's like, hold up, wait, really? Like, yes, Lord, I'm on fire for you, but you don't gotta take it that far. Like, I could be obedient to you in a different way. And we start trying to bargain with Him, and it's like, no, I mean, allow Him to enter into the space where it becomes difficult. Admit to Him, like, this thing is difficult, and allow Him to reside in that place. Allow His presence to be felt in that moment, so He can give us the strength to do the thing that He's called us to do. Because, I mean, Jesus was a human, right? So Jesus, part of Him being human is that He understands our weakness. So He's not offended by the fact that we don't want to do this thing that He called us to do. He wants to help us get to that point. Pastor Stephen Furtick preached yesterday, April 6th, 2025, about Abraham, and how Abraham was told to sacrifice his son. And Abraham was told to sacrifice his only son right after being given, or not right after, but after having already been given the promise by God that he was going to be the father of many nations. So it's like, now go sacrifice probably the way that you're going to be the father of many nations. Go ahead and sacrifice that thing. But it was the act of obedience where he's like, all right, well, God told me this. God also told me that. And it don't make sense to me, but I got to go do it anyway, because God told me to do it. But that gap in between, like, God telling you to do something and you doing it, is a difficult moment, and is a difficult circumstance to find yourself in. It's very difficult in our faith journey. It's where our faith grows, but it is very difficult. And I hope that I can provide you with some encouragement today that, yes, it is difficult, but God is with us, and He He wants to reside in that moment. He's not ashamed of us because we find it difficult, because we can admit that it's difficult. He's not ashamed of it. He's not like, but I thought you loved me. I thought you said you want to serve me. It's not that, you don't, that it's not that you don't want to. You just know that it's difficult. And allow God to minister to you in those difficult moments. Allow Him to carry you by just surrendering it and continuing to seek Him. And in prayer, let Him know that it's difficult, to trust Him, to take up your cross, to do the thing that is contrary to cultural society, the thing that may make you look like crazy in front of other people. Whatever the thing that God has called you to do, instructed you specifically to do, allow Him to strengthen you through prayer, through reading your word, and through devotion to Him. But that strength to do those things are only going to be found in Him. And you can find a million reasons why not to do the thing that God has called you to do when you don't seek Him. You're going to find evidence everywhere else, because it's the enemy working against you. So know also and be encouraged that the enemy is working against you because he knows the power behind the instruction. You don't know it. You don't know what's on the other side of a simple instruction. But yet, why is the enemy fighting you so hard against doing that simple instruction? Because the enemy knows the ramifications of that attack against the enemy's kingdom. And you don't know how strong and powerful your obedience is in the advancement of God's kingdom. So let's advance God's kingdom together by being obedient to God's voice in the difficult circumstances and the difficult times of our lives. Stay encouraged. Be blessed. Peace.